Greetings, subscribers! October is that time to watch horror movies. Well, many of us watch horror movies all year round. But one of the most influential horror movies ever was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Most people don't realize just how many later horror movies in some way or another took inspiration from Psycho. Additionally, with all the praise that Psycho has received, most people that I talk to have never even looked at any of the sequels. So today, I thought I'd review every Psycho movie ever in the style of my two favorite critics growing up, Siskel and Ebert. Those two would have to review a movie in depth, and then in the end have to simplify their opinion to a vote of either thumbs up or down. What I'm going to say today is only my opinion, and I always have the right to change my mind someday. Although I do sometimes give away spoilers in my videos, today I'm going to attempt to keep my spoilers minimal, but I probably won't be able to help giving away some. And with that warning, I'll get started. 1960 Psycho. This is a mystery movie. It's actually a surprisingly talky film, aside from two murder scenes, one of which is absolutely superbly done, and then a disgusting corpse at the end. If this same script were handled by a different director, different group of filmmakers, and different set of actors, then this could have been very boring. But with the way Alfred Hitchcock directs this, the performances from cast members like Janet Leigh, Vera Miles, John Gavins, and of course Anthony Perkins, not to mention the unforgettable score by Bernard Herrmann, this movie is intensely creepy and effective. The first time I saw it, I felt like I was trying to solve the mystery along with the characters. Then the second time I saw it, I really appreciated all the subtle hints throughout the film of the big surprise coming at the end, and I was still quite entertained. Now I just watched the movie again for making this video, and my feelings have not changed one bit. Many people call this film an absolute masterpiece, one which stands the test of time, and I have zero argument against that. However, if I were to really nitpick and were forced to mention elements that I did not like about this movie, then I would say that I do think the first 10 minutes before Marianne starts running are surprisingly boring, though it quickly picks up as highly entertaining after that. But my bigger issue is that after the climax's big reveal, there's a scene of a detective just standing there explaining things to characters. It's almost like the filmmakers were saying, "We're not sure if we made things clear enough with that ending. In case we didn't, we need to have someone practically look right at the camera and explain it all. And we'll also explain a few details which were not told at all earlier in the movie." I do wish the filmmakers had come up with a better way of having the story fully clarify itself in the end. But is that criticism enough to ruin the whole movie? No way. With all the positive things that I've already said about this film, I still haven't even got into certain elements that I love about the movie, such as lighting, composition, and so much more. I could go on forever, but I have to stop sometime. So what should I say in conclusion about Psycho? I'll just say, I think I fully understand why this movie was so groundbreaking during its release in 1960. And now, 64 years later in 2024, regardless if you're watching this for the first time or 10th time, it's still a truly excellent movie. Needless to say, I vote thumbs up. In 1983, that's 23 years after the release of the first film, and just 3 years after the passing of Alfred Hitchcock, Psycho 2 hit theaters. Anthony Perkins returns as Norman Bates for the lead role, and Vera Miles also returns as Lila, but in a much smaller role. This movie was written, produced, directed by, and the music was composed by a group of people who had nothing to do with the first Psycho movie, as far as I could see with some quick IMDb research. It was directed by a man named Richard Franklin, who does not appear to have many popular movies on his resume. Again, I say that based on a quick look on IMDb. Anyway, the story here is that 22 years later, Norman has restored his sanity in an institution and is released free. Norman returns to the old house by the motel. It's clear that he now wants to be a good person, but he soon starts seeing notes which are allegedly from his mother, images of his mother walking in the distance, and receiving phone calls from his mother. Nobody else sees or hears these, so viewers wonder, is it just Norman going mad again and hallucinating? Or is someone else secretly doing this in an effort to drive him back to insanity? That's the mystery of this movie. And if there is someone else doing this as a big trick, then who is it? By the time this movie ends and all questions are answered, it actually hit me as something much more powerful than anything in the first movie. It truly had my head spinning, making me feel crazy along with Norman. I realize what I'm about to say is a very bold statement, but I find the ending of Psycho 2 to be more effective than anything in the first Psycho movie. And without being too specific, I'll mention this movie's big ending shock may change the way you look back at the first movie. That said, is this entire movie leading up to the ending as intriguing as the first movie? No, not even close. None of the chemistry between characters, artistic cinematography, feeling of intensity, or chilling music of the first movie are rivaled during the time the sequel is leading up to its insane ending. Additionally, when you look back at this sequel a second time and ask yourself how many subtle hints were there of what was coming in the end, the answer is not enough. The writing here clearly does not compare to that of the original. However, Anthony Perkins' role calls for a lot more range here than the first film, showing all different kinds of emotions he's going through. And I feel that in the sequel, Perkins actually shows more depth of his skills in theater than he did in the first movie. But most of the other actors, though not terrible, give performances which just cannot be compared to that of the acting in the first film. Overall, is this sequel as good as the original? No. But is it still good enough to be worth watching? Yes, definitely. So with that, I recommend it. I vote thumbs up. Then just 3 years later in 1986, there was Psycho 3. This time Anthony Perkins directs, as well as returning to play the lead role of Norman Bates. Set only a month or so after the events of Part 2, this movie introduces a whole new set of characters around Norman who have no ties to any events from earlier films. One is an ex-nun who happens to look a lot like Marion Crane from the first movie and reminds Norman of her. Another is just a jerk who wants to become a famous singer, but gets a temporary job as assistant manager at the Bates Motel. Then there's this woman reporter who there isn't much to say about, other than the fact that she's curious about Norman. There's a segment with young football players and cheerleaders staying at the Bates Motel for a party. Honestly, this movie reminds me of a typical bad Friday the 13th sequel, only it's Norman at the Bates Motel rather than Jason at Camp Crystal Lake. It's just a new set of characters who had nothing to do with earlier movies and will have nothing to do with later sequels. They're all just there to get killed one by one. The ex-nun is clearly intended to be an interesting character, but I don't think she is. Most of the other characters don't appear they were even intended to be interesting. This movie story has no mystery, we know exactly who the killer is, how insane he is, etc. But with there being nothing to hide, this movie does show us a lot of the real side of Norman Bates, which we saw very little of in the first two movies. And remember how I talked about Part 2 having a shock ending which can change the way you look back at the first movie? Well, this third film undoes that, saying the information we learned at the end of Part 2 was not true, and we should just look back to the original film for the true facts. Personally, I just rolled my eyes when that happened. I will mention that this movie has its share of gore and nudity, two things there was virtually none of in the first movie, at least when you look back at it by today's standards, and very little of in the second film. I should also talk about my opinion of Anthony Perkins in his directorial debut. I felt that he had some surprisingly good ideas for camera composition, but the lighting was inconsistent. In some scenes it's really good and effective, but other scenes it's so dimly lit that I literally had to turn off all lights in my living room to try to see what was on my TV screen. I felt that the directing should have done better with pacing the story and getting chemistry between the actors. But I felt the real problem was Perkins' lack of ability to direct himself. What I mean by that is, there's a lot of scenes here when, as an actor, Perkins overdoes it. And since he's also the director, he doesn't keep himself in check when he's overacting. Now, I did look at fan reviews online, and it seems like a lot of people like this movie more than I did, and I'm happy for that. Maybe there's something good about this movie that I just don't see. But since this video is about my opinion, I have to give this movie thumbs down. Just 1 year later, in 1987, there was a made-for-TV movie called Bates Motel, which aired on NBC and is virtually forgotten these days. Please don't mistake this movie for the TV show of the same name, which ran from 2013 to 2017. This movie definitely ignored the events of Psycho 2 and 3. I think it was supposed to be in direct continuity with the first film, although I can't confirm that. It's possible this movie was just based on an idea of something that could have followed the events of the book, kind of like how the movie Hook was supposed to be a sequel to Peter Pan, even though it was not in direct continuity with any live-action or even animated version of Peter Pan. Anyway, this movie opens with us seeing Norman Bates being taken to an institution, and then we see doctors talking to a young boy in that institution named Alex West. It's recognized that Alex has a lot of similarities to Norman, and Norman becomes like a father figure mentor to Alex. Norman leaves it in his will that after he passes away, if Alex is released, he can inherit the Bates Motel. And just that happens. As Alex is preparing to open the motel, he finds a runaway girl named Willie is hiding out in the abandoned Bates home. They begin to make friends. Alex also makes friends with a local man named Henry, who offers to help Alex open the motel. While working on restoring the motel, skeletons are found in the ground that are said to be of Norman's parents, and Alex gets all kinds of hints that the house is haunted. Then on the night the motel opens, several guests show up and the story suddenly focuses on them and ignores the other characters we've been watching the whole time before. Then something supernatural happens between these characters. Now, I've read that this made-for-TV movie was proposed as a pilot for an ongoing TV show, but the TV show was never picked up. If it were picked up, I would have been curious to watch a few more episodes and see where the show goes. I get the impression that every episode would have been a different unconnected horror story of a guest staying in the hotel. And I think these stories would have had little or nothing to do with the Bates family. I'm guessing the title Bates Motel was just intended to serve as, pardon the expression, bait for viewers. Still, when I look at this made-for-TV movie right here, do I think it was that good? No. I felt like it didn't even know what tone it was going for. Parts of it felt like light drama, light comedy. When there were moments intended to be creepy, there wasn't enough of it and it wasn't effective enough, nor conclusive enough. I'm still not even sure how exactly I was supposed to feel towards some main characters like Alex and Willie. I recognize a handful of cast members from other things. Alex was played by Bud Cort, best known for Harold and Maude. Willie was played by Lori Petty, who I know is the title role in Tank Girl, a very strange movie. This actor, Jason Bateman, was the star of Teen Wolf 2. This actor, Robert Picardo, I've seen on Star Trek, some episodes of The Wonder Years, a few episodes of Smallville, and more. And this guy right here did a tiny role in Back to the Future, 1 and 2, amongst other things. But having cast members that are recognized from other things is not enough to make this a good movie. And while I might not think this movie is quite as terrible as some people say, I still definitely have to vote thumbs down. In 1990, there was Psycho 4: The Beginning, which was also a made-for-TV movie first premiering on Showtime. Joseph Stefano, who wrote the original 1960 film, which was based on a book, returns to write this film. And it was directed by Mick Garris, probably best known for writing Hocus Pocus. Anthony Perkins once again returns as Norman Bates, and the character has once again been released from an institution. He's now living in a different house, married to a woman doctor from the institution. He calls up a radio program while they're in the middle of discussing boys who've killed their mothers, and he tells multiple stories of his childhood, so we see a lot of flashbacks of his life as a teenager. Everything we see him go through is stuff we pretty much already know about, so no major surprises. I will say that the mother looks younger than I imagined. Cutting back to Norman as an adult, we pretty much only see him talking on the phone, up until the end when there's this whole piece about learning Norman's wife is pregnant and fear of what genes the baby might have. It ends with adult Norman going back to the house which he grew up in and meeting his wife there. Now, I'm not saying Anthony Perkins gives a bad performance, but the scenes of a different actor playing young Norman are clearly much more interesting than anything with Perkins as adult Norman. I should mention that young Norman is played by actor Henry Thomas, best known as Elliot in E.T., but he also played Jack Torrance in Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining. So, Henry Thomas has certainly done his share of filling in for roles of horror villains who had already become iconic while played by a different actor before. And I think Thomas both looks convincing as young Norman Bates here, and acts it. The mother is played by actress Olivia Hussey, best known as Juliet in the classic 1968 version of Romeo and Juliet, directed by Franco Zeffirelli. Anyway, this movie had no real mysteries or surprises. Nothing in this film has the same impact on me as Psycho 1 or 2, but I sure do enjoy it more than Psycho 3 or Bates Motel. But what's most important is that when it comes to simply comparing this film to itself, it is interesting and entertaining. So with that, I vote thumbs up. Then in 1998, there was a scene-for-scene, word-for-word remake of the original film. Most people say this is a shot-for-shot remake, but if you look closely, that's not 100% true. There are some changes for close-ups and additional images. Anyway, I'm about to upset some people when I say the following, but I think actress Anne Heche rivals Janet Leigh for how well she does with the role of Marion Crane. And I actually think Julianne Moore outdoes Vera Miles in the role of Lila Crane. However, I don't think Vince Vaughn is anywhere near as good as Anthony Perkins in the role of Norman Bates. I also don't think any of the visual changes the director made here were any improvement. Watching this film knowing the original story was just a strange experience for me. I still remember going to see this in the theater in 1998. I went with a friend who had never seen the original and had no idea what the story was. When that ending came, he asked me, "Wait, the mother was..." "Yeah? So there was no..." "No." "You mean the whole movie he was just talking to..." "Yes," I answered. "That's great," he said with such amazement. I was just like, whatever, I already knew the story. So I don't know what to say. Clearly this movie is overall not as good as the original. If you're going to watch one, it's definitely better to see the original. But there are some younger audiences who just refuse to watch older movies. When this came out in 1998, it was the new one, and the original was the old one. Now in 2024, to younger audiences, they're both considered old ones. Is this the only way to get certain younger people to sort of look at older films? When you take a black and white classic and colorize it, that usually doesn't attract younger audiences. But when they remade this word-for-word duplication of the original film, there were some younger fans who had no interest in watching the original, but paid money to go see this. So what can I say? If you've never seen either, I definitely recommend the original. But if you refuse to watch the original yet are willing to watch this, I guess I'd tell you to see it. But in my point of view, I can't help but comparing this to the original. So when it comes time to vote, I have to say, thumbs down. Okay, so that's basically it for today. That's my opinion of all 6 Psycho movies. In this video, I've already acknowledged the existence of the TV show Bates Motel, which ran from 2013 to 2017. But since that was not a movie, I don't want to get too into that one today. Of course, everything I've said here is just my opinion and nothing more, and I always have the right to change my mind someday. I hope you've enjoyed today's video regardless if you agree or disagree with me, and please leave your comments below, let me know what you think of what I've said. I'd love to discuss opinions with other fans. I hope some viewers will leave comments that give me new ideas and force me to look at these movies in a different way. By the way, please come back next week when I post a video of thumb votes for all 4 Pet Sematary movies, and the following week when I post a video of thumb votes for every Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Please hit like, and if you want to stay notified of all my videos, then please feel free to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell. I would love to have you. Thank you.